In this video, I'm going to go over the wisdom that I found or that was brought out of me while playing Galactic Civilizations 4 Supernova. Now, ahead of time, I want to say that this game is really deep and there's a lot in it, and that this is the first civilization or grand strategy game that I'm making a wisdom video for. So, although I want to focus more on like the space and the science and the futuristic part, there's going to be some more basic strategy elements to the wisdom here still. That being said, here are the three facets of wisdom that was brought out of me that I saw and found in Galactic Civilization 4 Supernova. Wisdom number 1. Advice isn't always good. Your advisors aren't always right. Wisdom number 2. Allies are way better than enemies. Wisdom number 3. Fundamental properties of all matter will continue to show themselves in other forms of sentience. All right, so now let's get into what I mean by these three, or what these three things mean and how they relate to reality. 1. Advice isn't always good. Your advisors aren't always right. Now, in Galactic Civilization 4, you have 3 advisors. You have the military, you have cultural, and you have technology. And based on what they recommend, your research, when you're researching new technology or new information or just new things in general, it goes faster if you research things that your advisors recommend. However, if you have a game plan and if you're aware of the situation your civilization is in, it's not always going to be best to do what the advisors recommend. And sometimes taking your advisor's advice and fast tracking the research they want you to do will actually put you in a more difficult position. Sometimes your military advisor wants you to make certain ships and get certain things when you don't have many threats around. Sometimes your technology advisor wants you to just make more scientists when you're already doing all right on the science, or when you just don't have enough manufacturing to support doing all that research just yet. Or sometimes your cultural advisor wants you to research things that makes you more influential and really brings out the artistic side of your people. But maybe there are too many enemies around, and that really wouldn't be a good choice. Either way, your advisors aren't always right. And though they have the best interests of the civilization at heart through their own biased ideas of what would best benefit the civilization, you have to take a step back and look at the situation and see, is this best? Are any of these best? Maybe none of these 3 recommendations are best. Maybe there's something else we can research that is going to go fast, relatively fast, or not take much longer than something they recommend, but will have better long-term implications, better suits your situation, or better suits your long-term strategy. Now, this can be seen even in normal day-to-day life of a normal person. You're going to have advisors of sorts in your lives, whether that's going to be just an influencer on a social media site, a parent, or a friend. You see, it's not that they mean you harm, although sometimes they might, but someone who you truly see as an advisor or gives you good advice in your life, they won't be able to see your situation in its entirety as well as you do, although they might see it even better than you. So I'm not saying never to ignore advice. I'm just saying that sometimes your advisors aren't always right and advice isn't always good, and that you need to be aware of your situation, your circumstances, what's going on around you, and you have to make choices and give yourself advice and focus on things yourself, whether or not people are giving you advice. Now, you might argue, this is sort of obvious. Does this really count as wisdom? Well, imagine, let's take the saying, intelligence is knowing tomato is a fruit, wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. You might have someone who gives you good advice and says, or who thinks they're giving you good advice and say, well, tomatoes got lycopene and that's good for your heart. So you should include some tomato with your fruit sometimes. You know, it's a fruit. And while they mean well, it wouldn't be a good idea to put tomato in a fruit salad. So that's what I mean is you just have to be aware of the situation and just stay wise and make good decisions based on your circumstances. Now, that one was a little easy and simple, and I'm sure most people understood what that meant. So let's get on to number two, which is more controversial, which is that allies are way better than enemies. You say this one seems obvious at first. Obviously, it's better to have friends than enemies. But what I mean by this is that if you decide your strategy is going to be built around warfare, you build a big military, how are you supposed to get the manufacturing if all you're focusing on is building fleets and gunships? How are you going to get the research if all you're building is big fleets and gunships? How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to have to do war. You're going to have to use your military if you've built a big military, if you focused on military. And you're basically building a civilization around basically theft at that point, theft by force. But here's the problem. Without enough manufacturing, how are you going to build your ships in the first place? So already you have a problem here, is that if you're focusing on military, you have to be able to build a military. And to be able to build a military, you need the manufacturing, you need the minerals, you need the material. And so already it would be better to at least start by focusing on manufacturing. And in fact, even to do research, you need to start by focusing on manufacturing because you have to build the research labs and you have to build all the research stuff. So already manufacturing is the probably the best start. So if you do that and you build a little manufacturing, you still want to focus on military. Well, now you're focusing on military instead of research. So you're not going to be unlocking weapons as fast. You're not going to be unlocking upgrades to your bombs and to your defenses and to your ship speed. And you're not going to be unlocking how many ships you can fit into one fleet with, using your communication abilities. So now you're lacking on manufacturing and research, and you have kind of a half-assed military because all you wanted to focus on was military. Well, let's look at this the other way. If we're not building military, we're not making a bunch of enemies. What do we have? We have allies. If you're focusing on building manufacturing, and that leads into building some research or a lot of research, now you can trade, you can do diplomacy, you can get more research from other people by trading with them, you can get more materials from other people by trading with them. And if you have more material and more research, then you can prepare for building a bigger military in case something goes wrong. Like if somebody turns on you, or if you have differing values, which is a big thing in this game and can really start wars just by having a little bit of a different value. And furthermore, if you can develop good diplomacy with treaties, you can actually have huge pacts where you share 25% of your research with each other, which means now your research will go 25% faster, your manufacturing can go 25% faster, and if you're doing things like influence or culture, that can grow 25% faster, with the only trade-off being that the person you make the pact with also is growing 25% faster. So one of you is probably going to win at that point. And if you do multiple packs, then you're going to be going even faster. So this is what I mean by allies are way better than enemies. It seems obvious. It is obvious. But the point here isn't just that allies are better than enemies. It's that diplomacy is better than warfare, and that it's better only to build a military for self-defense, for defensive purposes, and not for conquering or raiding or enslaving or anything like that, because that actually puts you behind. Now, the third one is the most sci-fi one, the most futuristic one, and it's fundamental properties of all matter will continue to show themselves in other forms of sentience. I'm sorry, let me get back to number two. How is allies are way better in real life? compared to just Galactic Civilization. Basically for the same reasons. If you're friends with people, you can share stuff with each other. You can share your knowledge with each other. You can build friendships. You can, share materials, give each other gifts, go out with each other, hang out with each other, talk about things, gossip about things, hopefully positively gossip about like information and technology and stuff. You can do research together. You can oh yeah, I also forgot to mention is in the game, if you have friends, you can ask them to go to war for you, and they can give you ships, and you can join your militaries together, and so you can do warfare together. So you don't have to have as big of a military as somebody else because you can have one, two, even three other friends, whole civilizations join in with you, and it's the same way in real life. Now, when I get into number three, it is going to contradict this a little bit. The fundamental properties of all matter will continue to show themselves in other forms of sentience. And that means, just like the fundamental properties of matter that you see in human beings and in animals, which is that we collide, we conflict, we have differences, we're independent, we're separate, and we have patterns. And these patterns can be very destructive and they can be egotistical sometimes. And certain things emerge from our patterns. And that's always going to show itself. And what I mean by this is that if you're trying to think of alien life as in like these strange, weird forms of things that we can't possibly imagine, I don't think that's going to be realistic. I think Galactic Civilization really has a point where if you look at the other races and the other civilizations in the game, they're not usually that radically different. The weirdest ones are like the ones that are radioactive and they're like weird germ things, or the big eyeballs that they can memorize things and they can learn that way, but they're not really conscious or sentient. They're just really good at memorizing things and then doing those things. So if they see something new, they can record it and they can mimic it. They're like mimics, but they're like consciousless mimics. But they're civilization enough, they're grouped enough that they count as like a civilization or an opposing force. And that's because of the base properties of matter and the patterns in reality and the patterns of like physics and chemistry and stuff, and things that come all the way down from like particles that build into like bacteria. And I think that's probably what you're going to find in real life. If we find alien life, is you're going to find that they still have these same fundamental properties, which means there's going to be very traditional types, there's going to be conquering destructive types, there's going to be ravenous hungry types, and we're not always going to be able to get along, and we're going to have to be able to defend ourselves at some point, just like we do in real life against each other human beings and other animals. And that's both unfortunate but also kind of exciting and interesting to think about. It means that there probably won't be anything so far-fetched that it's going to melt our brains when we find out about it, or that we won't be able to completely non-understand it. Like, we're always going to be able to wrap our heads around anything we can observe to some degree, just like we can so far with our reality. And that's what I mean by fundamental properties of all matter will continue to show themselves in other forms of sentience. You see this in galactic civilizations based on like the races and the civilizations and the beings. And I think we're going to see this because these are base properties of existence, of reality, and forms of matter. And so as long as these properties of matter exist, and these patterns of matter exist, we're going to continue seeing them. We're just going to see different variations of the patterns. Okay, so those were my three facets of wisdom that I got out of Galactic Civilization 4. I hope you felt like that was interesting and that it was a little stimulating. And if you liked it, then check out some of my previous wisdom videos and stay tuned for future wisdom videos.